Good morning. Thank you very much for coming this morning. We have roughly 6 hours together today. We're going to cover a lot of material. Some of it is very new. Some of the ideas are very old. They come from the history of technical analysis. So I think one of the things that's very important to understand in technical analysis is that we have a very, very deep history, and that many of the older ideas are very much viable today, but in many cases they have been forgotten. So I'm going to combine the newest sorts of research that we've done with some older ideas. Answer this question: whether prices are high or low on a relative basis. Some people believe that simply by touching the upper band it is a sell signal. Some people believe that simply by touching the lower band it is a buy signal. But this is not true. What the bands do is answer this question as to whether prices are high or low on a relative basis, and with that information we can then combine price action and indicator action to arrive at rigorous investment decisions. The problem here, of course, is that as this pattern is being defined, we make a new absolute low in price. So we have a new absolute low in price, but later on I will demonstrate that this is not a new low relative to the Bollinger Bands. So this is a key Bollinger Band concept, the idea of a new absolute low, but not a new relative low. But we will revisit this concept later. I just wish to introduce you to this idea at this moment. So Bollinger Bands define whether prices are high or low on a relative basis. By definition, and there can be no argument with this, by definition, prices are high at the upper band and prices are low at the lower band. So Bollinger Bands are comprised of a measure of trend, which direction prices are moving, and a measure of volatility. That measure of trend is a simple moving average, and the measure of volatility is standard deviation. So many people wish to use the middle Bollinger Band as a signal, but to buy when we cross over, to sell when we cross it. But it is much more important the direction of the average. So this is the second important concept, that Bollinger Bands answer the question high or low, and that they are a combination of trend information and volatility information. So this is the construction of Bollinger Bands. The middle band is a moving average, usually a simple moving average. You'll see again and again and again the value, the close, the close, the close. Very rarely were highs and lows used at all. But as we have moved into modern markets, where some stocks are traded in many different markets around the world, and foreign exchange is traded continuously, more and more emphasis has been placed, and correctly, I think, on the highs and lows of the day rather than the close. So for markets where we have this 24-hour trading characteristic, or the session has become not well defined anymore, we developed Bollinger Envelopes. And here we have a chart again of Nucor, but this time with Bollinger Envelopes instead of Bollinger Bands. So Bollinger Envelopes are simply Bollinger Bands adapted for markets where the trading session is not well defined. The focus is on the highs and lows rather than on the closes. So we have four major components in order to create Bollinger envelopes. So if you compare the chart on page 23 with the chart on, you will see some of the differences between Bollinger envelopes and Bollinger Bands. Now today we're going to talk about a number of indicators that we create from Bollinger Bands. We'll talk about percent B and bandwidth, a trend measure called BB trend and such. All of these indicators can be created either with Bollinger Bands or Bollinger envelopes, depending on the markets that you actually trade. Now this is, we start now on a module about multiple bands, using not just one set of Bollinger Bands, but using multiple sets of Bollinger Bands at the same time. And for me, this is one of the most interesting areas of research that I know of. So there are two ways to employ multiple bands. The approach one is use the same middle band and plot bands of different widths around it. So, and approach two is you use two different periods of Bollinger Bands and plot them at the same time. My personal favorite is 20-period Bollinger Bands and 50-period Bollinger Bands plotted at the same time. So the first of these new indicators was BB impulse, and it measures the very, very short-term strength in the market. Recall before when we talked about the W bottom and the non-confirmation was said to wait for a strong day to act on the signal. The actual non-confirmation is an alert, and then that first strong day is actually the signal. So that first day, first strong day, has a name. It is called a sign of strength, or SOS. If it is a top that we are talking about, and it is the first strong down day, it is called a sign of weakness, SOW. The definition of a sign of strength is a day of greater than average price change and greater than average volume. So if on average price rises by 1.5 points on up days, then today's price rise is 3. It's greater than average. So that's one component of a sign of strength. So the other component is greater than average volume. So we say when volume is above the 50-day moving average. So a BB impulse helps us define the sign of strength, so we don't have to guess anymore as to whether it is a strong day or not. So here we have an example of how valuable these signals can be when they occur outside of the bands. These hips and lops, when they occur cleanly and clearly outside of the bands, are almost always reversal points. The problem, of course, is that there is a delay. You know, you must have the next two bars to recognize the hip or the lop. So in some cases, this delay, because you must have the next two bars to know that this is in fact a hip. This delay can be very frustrating because you'll want to move right into the position. You look and you say, ah, yes, I know that's going to be a hip. There's no way it's going to get taken out. But nonetheless, we must wait until here before we know that we have one. So this is a very important technical concept because this is an indicator that peeks into the future. On the chart, it looks terrific. Oh yes, it picked the high exactly. But you did not know that it was picked for 2 more days. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen technical systems or technical tools that peeked into the future without acknowledging it. So while identifying a candlestick pattern at the upper band or at the lower band is easy to do because we only need one bar to identify, or maybe two or three, but the other two are in the past. So I use them as alerts. When I see this, right, I go, wow, that potentially is a hip. In 2 periods, I will know that it is a hip. So I put it on a watch list, and I wait for it to happen. You must be very, very careful when you use indicators like this that peek into the future. Very careful.